As someone who has spent the last decade researching Nigerian student subcultures and documenting them through both academic writing and YouTube investigative pieces, one of the most intriguing and controversial subjects remains the rise of cultism on campuses. Among these, the University of Port Harcourt, Uniport, stands out as one of the most significant battlegrounds in confraternity history. The Vikings Confraternity, which traces its roots back to Uniport in the early 1980s, not only shaped the landscape of cultism in Rivers State but also managed to establish itself as the dominant force against rivals such as the Buccaneers, Klansmen (KK), and Blackaxe Neo-Black movement. This dominance wasn't just about numbers only. It was about psychology, identity, community influence, and survival strategies that gave Vikings a near-mythical status in Port Harcourt. The Vikings Confraternity, officially known as the Norsemen Club of Nigeria, was founded with the imagery of sea pirates, adventure, and solidarity. Uniport became its incubation ground, and from there, it spread like wildfire. While many other confraternities existed before it, Vikings positioned itself differently by rooting its identity deeply in Port Harcourt's cultural soil. Unlike groups that appeared foreign to the Niger Delta student, Vikings carried a sense of homegrown pride. Uniport students didn't see it as an import, they saw it as something that belonged to them. This sense of origin became a psychological weapon against rivals. If Buccaneers carried the imagery of maritime warriors and Blackaxe pushed revolutionary brotherhood, Vikings countered with the idea of being the true Port Harcourt confraternity. From the late 1980s through the 1990s, Uniport was a hotbed of confraternity clashes. The Buccaneers, KK, and Blackaxe all tried to hold sway over territory, student influence, and reputation. But Vikings played a different game. Rather than simply fight for turf, they focused on 1. Recruitment strategy. Vikings pulled students not just from Uniport but from surrounding communities in Port Harcourt. By tapping into secondary schools and street corners, they built pipelines that guaranteed loyalty before students even got admitted. 2. Cultural embedding. While Buccaneers were seen as elitist and Blackaxe as radical, Vikings branded themselves as everyman's brotherhood. This made it easier for ordinary students to align with them. 3. Community presence. Uniport is deeply connected to Port Harcourt city life. Vikings extended beyond the campus, creating strong links with local youth groups, which reinforced their power in the city. By the late 1990s, Buccaneers and KK were already struggling to hold their ground. Blackaxe maintained its ferocity, but Vikings had begun to outnumber and outmaneuver them. The Buccaneers, also called Allura or Sea Lords, had once been strong in Uniport, with their maritime and adventurous identity appealing to students. However, they faced two problems. Elitist perception. Students began to see Buccaneers as more exclusive and selective. This worked against them in a university and city where mass recruitment became the lifeblood of dominance. Viking counter-narrative. Vikings painted Buccaneers as outsiders and elevated themselves as the sons of the soil. By the early 2000s, Buccaneers' presence in Uniport had dramatically declined. The dominance of Vikings wasn't just about raw violence, it was about winning the psychological war of identity and belonging. The Klansmen (KK) were a smaller confraternity that tried to carve out their identity in Uniport. But their lack of a strong cultural foundation meant they were easily overshadowed. Unlike Vikings or Blackaxe, KK didn't have a strong community pipeline or historic identity tied to the Niger Delta. This made them vulnerable. Over time, KK members either defected to other groups or were absorbed through force and intimidation. By the mid-2000s, KK's presence at Uniport had been reduced to a whisper, and in the hierarchy of cult rivalry, they were no longer considered a real threat. The Blackaxe Neo-Black movement, founded with Pan-African revolutionary ideals, was the toughest rival Vikings ever faced in Uniport. Unlike Buccaneers and KK, Blackaxe carried a serious ideological and militant edge that made them formidable. Throughout the late 1990s and 2000s, Uniport saw several bloody encounters between Vikings and Blackaxe members. Each group fought for dominance, not just on campus but also in the surrounding city. Yet, Vikings' advantage was their sheer numbers and local acceptance. Almost everyone in Port Harcourt either claimed Viking membership, had family who were members, or lived in communities where Vikings controlled the streets. This overwhelming cultural integration made it nearly impossible for Blackaxe to uproot them in Port Harcourt. By the 2010s, Vikings had established what can only be called a hegemonic presence. Blackaxe still existed, but their ability to dominate Uniport had been broken. One of the most fascinating aspects of Vikings' dominance at Uniport is how it spilled into Port Harcourt city itself. Unlike other confraternities that remained primarily campus-based, Vikings became embedded in local youth groups, nightlife culture, music and street art, political street mobilization. Because of this, almost everyone in Port Harcourt either directly or indirectly came under the cultural shadow of Vikings. It became less about choice and more about environment. This is why many locals today say, almost everybody in Port Harcourt is Vikings. The city and the confraternity have become so intertwined that separating the two would take decades, if not longer. The question many researchers and observers ask is, why haven't Buccaneers, KK, or Blackaxe been able to reclaim dominance in Uniport? The answer lies in 4 pillars. 1. Numbers. Vikings' recruitment pipeline ensures they always outnumber rivals. 2. Cultural identity. Being homegrown in Uniport and Port Harcourt makes them unshakable. 3. Community integration. Their presence in the city creates an external support system beyond campus. 4. Historical momentum. Having dominated for decades, new generations of students grow up hearing Vikings as the natural power. For any rival group to dethrone Vikings, they would need to overcome not just confraternity battles but also decades of cultural entrenchment in Port Harcourt society. As a researcher and YouTuber, I must emphasize, this exploration is not an endorsement of confraternity violence. Rather, it is a sociological documentation of how identity, community, and culture play a role in shaping group dominance. The Viking story at the University of Port Harcourt is one of origin, expansion, and cultural conquest. Their rivals, the Buccaneers, KK, and Blackaxe, fought hard, but they couldn't match the combination of numbers, identity, and citywide influence that made Vikings nearly impossible to dislodge. Even today, when you step into Uniport or Port Harcourt at large, the aura of Vikings is everywhere. It is not just a confraternity, it has become part of the urban DNA of Port Harcourt. Whether one views this as a cautionary tale or a case study in organizational dominance, one thing is clear: the Vikings' grip on Uniport remains unmatched, and conquering them may remain impossible for generations to come. This content is for educational purposes only. We don't support cultism. Thank you for watching.